I've picked out two graphs to show you how to graph trig functions. The first one is a sine graph, and our second one is going to be a tangent graph. The hardest part of graphing trig functions, I think, for most students is what to put on the x-axis. So we'll just go through this step by step, and it'll make sense. So the very first thing is I wrote out this list over here of amplitude, period, spacing, horizontal shift, and vertical shift. So we're going to fill these things out one by one. Amplitude is the number in front of the trig function. So that's the 2. Usually people do not have trouble figuring that out. So our amplitude is 2. The period for sine and cosine, you take the number in front of x, which is the 4 on the outside of our parentheses, and you do 2 pi divided by that number. They call that number b usually, so in a book you'll see they write 2 pi divided by b, and then for our problem that's going to be 2 pi divided by 4, which is pi over 2 when we reduce that. Now there's this other thing right here that I include, which is spacing. That helps you with the spacing on the x-axis. So what you do to find that every time is take the period divided into 4 parts. So period divided by 4, which for us will be pi over 2 divided by 4, which most people don't like to do that without a calculator because of the fractions. But that's just the same as taking pi over 2 and multiplying by the reciprocal of 4, so times by 1/4, and that just equals pi over 8. Now this spacing step, you can do it for all of the trig graphs except tangent and cotangent. Those work differently, and we're going to do a tangent after this. Now the horizontal shift is the number added or subtracted to the x in the parentheses. So here they have plus pi over 3. That means it's to the left pi over 3. It always goes the opposite of what you would think when it's in the parentheses and it's moving it horizontally. And some teachers might want you to write, just say negative pi over 3. For the horizontal shift. That's the same thing as moving to the left, pi over 3. And then the final thing is any number that's added or subtracted outside of the parentheses is the vertical shift. So for us, this is positive 1, so that's up 1. Or you could just write positive 1. Sometimes they put that number at the very beginning of the equation, and it means the same thing, like if they wrote 1 plus 2 sine of 4 x plus pi over 3. That's the same thing. Okay, so now let's tackle the hardest thing first, which is the x-axis. What I always do first is mark the horizontal shift onto the x-axis. So that's what we're going to do first. And we said it was negative pi over 3, and I'm going to leave myself space because I know there's going to be a few other negative numbers to mark down. So I'm going to put negative pi over 3 over here. And if you don't leave yourself enough space at first, just erase it and move it to where you need it to be, because sometimes it's hard to predict how much space you'll need. So there's the horizontal shift. Now, this is where my spacing comes in. And it's always harder with fractions, but you can do this. So the spacing is pi over 8. What that means is the space between each of my tick marks on the x-axis is going to be pi over 8. So to figure out what those numbers are exactly, I need to take my horizontal shift, right here, I'll just write it here, negative pi over 3, because that's my starting point, and I need to add the amount of space to that, which we said was pi over 8, and then you just need to get common denominators. So this is the same as taking negative 8 pi over 24 plus 3 pi over 24. And that's equal to negative 5 pi over 24. Not a nice number, but it's negative, so that's going to go right here. And then I just continue adding the spacing, which was pi over 8, to each number. The easiest thing, though, is just to leave everything over 24, because then you have a common denominator. So I'm going to take negative 5 pi over 24, and I'm adding pi over 8 to it, but we just figured out that that's the same thing as 3 pi over 24. So just keep doing it that way so that you have a common denominator. So plus 3 pi over 24, that equals negative 2 pi over 24. Now, even though that reduces, I'm not going to reduce it because I want everything to continue being over 24 just to make it easier. So negative 2 pi over 24 is that mark. Then just add. Usually I do this part in my head, but I just want to write it down. So plus 3 pi over 24 again, because that's the same as adding pi over 8. That gets you pi over 24. Now see, that's our first positive number, so I'm going to jump over the 0 and put pi over 24 here. And then you always need a total of 5 tick marks. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 so far. So my last one is adding pi over 24 plus 3 pi over 24, which equals 4 pi over 24. So that's my final tick mark, 4 pi over 24. And you know, if you have a teacher that wants all of the numbers reduced, which most of them do, then just go back through and you could erase the numbers and put the reduced fractions down. But we're just going to leave it like this for what we're doing. So that's the spacing. You take the very first number, which is always your horizontal shift, and then you add the spacing, which was pi over 8, to that number to get your second number. You keep adding the spacing to your subsequent answers to get the next tick marks until you have a total of 5 tick marks. And the period is there now, because if you subtracted 4 pi over 24 minus negative pi over 3, which we won't do, but if you did do that, the total period would equal pi over 2. Okay, so now we're going to put in the things on the y-axis, which the first thing would be to mark the vertical shift. So overall, this is our third thing that we're doing. So the vertical shift was up 1, so that's here. So that's a 1. And then the amplitude was 2. So from the 1, and actually I'm going to put a dotted line in at 1, because that'll help. A lot of teachers teach you to do this in class. So you put a dashed line along where the vertical shift is. The amplitude is 2, so that means it goes up to 3 and down to negative 1. Let's put that down here so we have enough room to mark it. Okay, now we have all of our numbers. Now you just have to remember that sine, the overall shape of it, it starts in the middle. It goes up, back to the middle, down, back to the middle. So those are the 5 points we're going to plot. So at my starting tick mark, I need to be in the middle. Then I need to be at the highest point at the next tick mark, back to the middle. Then, now here's where some people make a mistake. Don't put that point at 0. Put it under the next tick mark, which was pi over 24, and then back to the middle. And then you can connect your points. And there's your sine graph.